Hello and welcome to the European Parliament in Brussels for this new edition of Talking Europe. Can France go it alone? This week, Nicolas Sarkozy said that France will press ahead with a tax on financial transactions. The French president said that France must take the lead and show the example to other EU member states in order for them to follow suit. But with the United Kingdom firmly opposed to the scheme, can such a tax work? I'll put this question to my guest who will soon join me on this set. Also, there is the second part of Talking Europe. We'll bring you a close-up interview with Joaquin Almunia, the EU Commissioner in charge of competition. Will focus on the future of the Eurozone. But as always, let's start on our set to talk about the Tobin tax, the tax on financial transactions, which Nicolas Sarkozy, the French president, would like to implement as soon as possible. Let me introduce you to my two guests here, starting to my right with you, Wolf Klinz. Welcome. You're a German MEP from the Alliance of Liberals and Democrats for Europe. Angela Merkel is in favor of the tax, but she doesn't want to go alone with the French. She would like a pan-European agreement. We'll discuss this later, of course. Also on this set, Richard Ashworth. You're a British MEP from the European Conservatives and Reformists. Now, it's no secret your country, the UK, is firmly opposed to the Tobin tax. You'll tell us why. But before we start our discussion, let's have a look at our report. Now, the Tobin tax was named after economist and Nobel laureate James Tobin. The idea, of course, is to tax financial transactions. Nicolas Sarkozy is pushing ahead, as we are seeing in our report.
More divides are splintering Europe as the controversial Tobin tax debate heats up. France wants to introduce the tax as early as next month and is happy to go it alone.
We want to implement the tax in the Eurozone, and once the Eurozone has it, the whole world will adopt the tax. Because people will ask, why don't all countries use the tax? Since the Eurozone had the wisdom to implement it.
German Chancellor Angela Merkel said on Monday that Europe's finance ministers should prepare for the implementation of the tax as soon as March. This comes just 24 hours after British Prime Minister David Cameron said he would veto such a move. Sweden is the only country that has implemented the tax. It was introduced back in the 80s, but was abandoned after 6 years, having raised little cash and put off investors. According to some analysts, France could suffer the same fate.
Banks are the most global sector, and I guess it makes no sense to have only in one country a financial transaction tax, because the investors will go in other countries, into England, to Germany, to do their business in that country.
To avoid this, the European Commission wants to implement a European-wide financial transaction tax of 0.1%. This would generate around 55 billion euros of much needed money.
Our report there, Wolf Klinz. Let's start with the basics. A tax on financial transactions, is it a good idea?
I think it's an understandable idea, because the financial sector has certainly contributed a lot to the difficulties that we have right now. So the citizens, the average citizens, would expect the financial sector to contribute to overcoming the crisis that we are in right now. So it would be a good signal. It would be approved by probably the majority of the citizens. On the other hand, is it a good idea apart from that signal effect? I think ideally it would be the tax should be introduced at a global scale. We do know this is impossible. The Americans, the Asians have made it quite clear. From the Chinese, from the very beginning, we are not part of that. So we are left with Europe. And here, again, we know that the UK is clearly, adamantly against it. So we will not see the tax in the European Union of the 27. And so we are back to the Eurozone countries. I think, personally, it may be worth trying to introduce it within the Eurozone, but only at the condition that the others are at least prepared to follow suit after, say, 3 or 4 or 5 years experience.
Mr. Ashworth, as we heard, and this is the position of France and Germany, the financial sector is largely responsible for the crisis. It's only fair that they should contribute in its resolution. You don't agree?
No, because that sounds like let's band together and punish bankers. They cause the problem, so let's punish them, we'll have a tax on them. Well, that's not a very good approach, and there are plenty of other ways that you can control the banking sector. What we're talking about here is a tax which will add cost to the financial services sector. Now, it's no secret. It's a very, very important business to the United Kingdom, but in fact, we would maintain that that brings benefit to the whole of the European Union. We're prepared to accept if a financial services or financial transaction tax is a global tax, then fine, we don't have a problem with it. But all the while, the United States of America or the Far East say, we're not going to have it, then why would we in the United Kingdom want to damage our competitiveness? So we would say no.
Do you share this concern? I mean, the figures, because the idea has already been explored by the European Commission, the idea is to tax financial transactions at a level of 0.1%. Yes. That's not a lot, some say.
It's very, very...
But do you share the concern of the British that this will end up damaging the financial sector in Europe?
It will certainly have an impact, and that is what the introduction of the tax is meant to do. We do want to, for instance, impact negatively the high-frequency trading. We want to make sure that speculative moves or transactions that do not serve the real economy are being hit. And so therefore, sure, the business of high-frequency trading will be smaller after the introduction of the tax. That said, I would say the impact is not only negative, as you put it, on London or on the financial transactions in Europe, because the way the Commission has designed the tax, the Commission wants to introduce the so-called residence principle. That means that if one participant is resident in the European Union, the tax will apply even though the transaction does take place in Singapore, New York, or elsewhere. And therefore, I think that the negative movements, the negative impact will be limited.
You don't share that view?
No. And one of the things that the United Kingdom is wanting to say to the rest of Europe, look, many countries in Europe have a sovereign debt crisis. We understand that, and we realize it has to be tackled. But underlying that, we've got bigger problems still. Growth in the economy. We desperately need growth, and yet actually we're focusing all our fire and attention on Tobin tax, for example, but we're not talking about competitiveness of the European economy. That's the desperate issue which we should be focusing our fire on at this time. It's not to say that these other issues aren't important, but I think taxing things like the City of London would be very damaging to the competitiveness.
Now let's talk about the stance of Nicolas Sarkozy. He said if the others don't want to follow suit, we will go ahead. There's of course all eyes are now on Germany. What will the Germans do?
I think if France did what Sarkozy indicated, namely to introduce the tax alone, if nobody else would follow suit, I think that would turn out to be a disaster for France. I would not recommend.
But what is the
France.
position of Germany?
Well, no,
your party is in the coalition.
My party is in the coalition, and my party leadership is in favor of the tax if the tax be introduced at a European level, EU 27. Now we do know that
the UK
will not happen. So therefore, my party leadership is against the introduction of the tax. Some members of our party leadership say, okay, let's start at the Eurozone level, that's fair enough, and then maybe we can prove to the others that it won't be such a disaster after all. But I do, of course, share the point of view that you just made, that we have other important issues to consider and to work on. The introduction of this tax should never be seen as a remedy of the crisis. This is, and it should also not be seen as a mere mean to sort of create additional revenues, as much as they may be welcome. We should introduce the tax only if we feel that we can maybe fight some speculative moves in the financial sector that we do not want to see in the future.
Yeah, and to put that back into perspective, if I may, because one, there's an element of saying, well, let's punish the bankers. Well, that may or may not be so. Two, it's a way that we can raise revenue which will not affect the real economy. Those are valid arguments which deserve discussion. But at the end of the day, you know, Europe is in crisis, and here we are arguing about those 2 points, when really...
But Nicolas Sarkozy says it's only part of the solution.
Exactly. But the whole thing then gets wrapped up in the question about treaty change. Now, the future success of the euro and the combined economy surely will be determined by the markets, and the markets want to see action now.
Right.
If we're talking treaty change, Lisbon took 2.5 years to achieve. There's no earthly point going to the markets and saying, well, in about 3 years' time from now, we'll have a solution for you. That won't wash. So we, the British, feel frustration about this. We feel you need legislation, fine, most of which you've already got. You've got a Growth and Stability Pact, you've got the Six-Pack. Make it work.
Now, you said Germany will ideally would like everybody to be on board. Now, you understand Britain won't sign a deal, probably Sweden either. What is your feeling? Do you think that Italy, Spain, Denmark, are they interested?
I think the Eurozone members would be part of it. Ireland may hesitate, looking at the neighbour of the UK, but if we cannot at least get the 17 Eurozone members to support this program or this project, then I think it's dead. I would not recommend any country, or not even a few countries, to introduce it without having at least a cohesive...
and you know, I think that what we have to learn from these past problems is the European economies are so integrated today that even if France goes ahead with a Tobin tax and the United Kingdom doesn't, the complexities further downstream from that could be enormous. It's far better we reach an agreement together.
Yes, I agree with that.
But if there is an agreement at the level of the Eurozone, 17 economies, now estimates say that this could raise up to 55 billion euros each year in the EU. Surely this would create a precedent.
We probably would. We've made our position perfectly clear. We would not accept it. It's a red line issue for the United Kingdom, and it will remain so. Now, that
will not encourage you to reconsider the plan if it's a success at the level of the 17 Eurozone members.
How are you going to gauge success? If it damages competitiveness, don't ask us to accept that. So no, I just don't see that argument. I'd never say never, but
we would have to find. I mean, there are still a few questions that will have to be answered. First of all, what is this money going to be used for? You know, for the European Union, for the country where the tax is being levied, how is it going to be distributed, etc. Point two, is there going to be a negative impact of introducing the tax? Is it slowing down growth to some extent?
This is, of course, the biggest worry.
That's the biggest worry. And so before we really introduce it, we should try to get as good an answer to these questions as possible. Then I would say, if the Eurozone members were ready to introduce the tax, we should, you know, try it out for a period of 2 or 3 years, and if it really does fly and does produce good results, then I think we might have a story to convince at least the 10 other members, the 9 other members to join. So we would have 26 then.
Yeah, but look, this is where the story's been changed as we go along, as the narrative goes along, because the Tobin tax was being introduced as an own resource of the European Union. It was money which was to be paid into the central coffers of the EU. Now, actually, I would say if you're talking 50 billion euros, just increase it from 1% GNI to 1.1% GNI. Job done. Why do you have to have an argument like this? So Sarkozy is now turning around saying, oh, no, it's not an own resource. This is going to be a French and a German national tax, which goes to the French and German national treasury. That's something entirely different.
Yeah, but that's one point. There are other points. Others say, well, let's finally use it, at least use part of it, to help the developing world. You know, use it to live up to our promise that we would spend 0.7% of our GDP in Europe as development aid.
Fine, so that's all well and good, but then the United Kingdom would say, well, look, what percentage of that would come from the City of London?
Yeah, absolutely.
In which case, we want a rebate. So then you're in trouble.
It's a never-ending story. Now, we've got 2 minutes left. You were talking about reforming the financial sector. You say you understand the need to reform the financial sector. If not the Tobin tax, what do you think should happen?
We are sympathetic to the call for reform. We're anxious that the pendulum doesn't swing completely in the opposite direction, because that so often happens, that you actually damage the industry, which created such an awful lot of benefit in the first instance. So we are open to new regulation. We accepted the six-pack. We accept other further regulation. We're open to that. We're prepared to negotiate. But what we will not do is damage the competitiveness of a core industry for the United Kingdom.
But yes, please.
Yes, well, I mean, the European Union has introduced a number of new regulatory measures for the financial sector. Each and every one of those regulations does make sense. But when you put them all together and think of the cumulative impact, then you will wonder whether or not we are not going overboard, so to speak. And there I think we have to be very careful not to over-regulate the sector. We have to make sure that we do not kill the innovative and entrepreneurial spirit in the sector that we still have to rely on in the future.
There are many other ways that you could do it. VAT, for example, you could take a bigger element of that.
Yeah.
I just think that prompting this argument at this time is distracting and disastrous for the European Union, when we really should be talking about better value for money, greater competitiveness of the European economy, and getting growth back in the economy.
Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there as we're running out of time, but thank you very much for discussing the Tobin tax with us on France 24. And please stay with us. We'll return after the news break. We'll bring you an interview with Joaquin Almunia, the EU Commissioner in charge of competition.